In this video, we'll discuss the features on Mads Mikkelsen's face that point to a likely authoritative nature, as well as a need for expression and sensory stimulation. Enjoy. In today's face reading video, we're looking at Mads Mikkelsen. I was just watching a movie with him the other day, Doctor Strange actually, and his bone structure and his face really caught my attention. I've seen him many times. Many of you are probably familiar with him and his work, but I wanted to read his face because there were some interesting threads that I think are worth talking about. If you are new to my channel, welcome, but please go up here and watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. That'll give you terms and terminology and orient you to this larger process of face reading, which is a branch of Chinese medicine. But there are some terms that I'll typically use, and if you're not familiar with those, you'll be a bit lost. When I was looking at his face, two primary features leapt out to me. The first one were his cheekbones, and the second one was his mouth, which is very, very dominant. So both of these features, and these two features being dominant on his face are auspicious in the sense that if we look at the 5-element wheel, fire, earth, metal, water, and wood, earth and metal are close to each other. Earth engenders or creates metal. Fire, earth, metal. So when we see a dominant mouth feature, which is an earth element feature, when we see the earth element, and then we see the cheekbones, that's a metal feature. Two dominant elements that naturally coexist next to each other and then essentially feed into each other. This is auspicious. This is good. These are not conflicting elements. These are essentially elemental rhythms in his life that are dominant. When you have dominance in two elements like that, when they're close to each other and one connects into the other, that means that's good. It's essentially like the unification of elements a little bit because they blend over and cross over, but that's a good sign. So let's talk about the cheekbones first. When we look at the cheeks, this is a metal feature. Okay, it's also in the lens of face reading where we talk about mountains and rivers. These are the mountains. These are the big bony protrusions. But from an elemental perspective, the cheek geography relates to the metal element, lung function, large intestine function, but also has to do with the metal themes, femininity, creativity, feng shui, spatial orientation. There's a lot that goes on with the metal element, beauty and art. That all falls into the metal territory. But when we see these big dominant cheekbones, what it said is there's definitely an authoritative quality to the person. My late teacher, Lillian, used to say that these are, big cheekbones means you're bossy. And she would say, but bossy doesn't necessarily mean bad. Some people are supposed to boss people around a little bit. Sometimes they're good at delegating. They're good at telling people what to do. And they have a head for it. They have a mind for it. They have the spirit for it. So with those big cheekbones, there's definitely going to be an authoritative quality that he needs to lean into. Now, whether that shows up in acting, whether that shows up in his interpersonal life, it's really hard to say unless I was talking to him. But that authoritative quality is important when you carry those big cheekbones. That's really a sign that the metal has structure in your life. And metal is about structure and how our lives are ordered and put into place and how we do things. People who keep schedules are very orderly, and that can relate to the metal element as well. So big dominant cheekbones. It's a great feature on him. And the mouth. That is an earth feature. So it relates to house and home. It relates to tenderness, sweetness. It relates to dietary rhythms. It also relates to the 5 senses and expression. So when we see a big dominant full mouth, and by definition, he has a shapely mouth. If my teacher, Lillian, she would say whenever she would see a beautiful mouth, she would always say, "Oh, it's a beautiful mouth." Like she loves the shapes of mouths. She was really into that. But she would have said that about him. He's got a beautiful mouth. It's shapely, got nice curves. It's full, it's wide, but it's also not excessively dominant in your face to the point where it's off-putting. There's something refined and balanced about it. So when we see that kind of feature, and we see that well-shaped mouth that's also large and dominant, though, we're looking at the use of the earth element. So this can come in a lot of different ways. The earth element regulates the 4 limbs. So there's definitely something to be said about exercising and having there be some ease in that area. if he were to go and explore that. So in thinking, when people have dominant earth mouths, usually the use of the forelimbs and strength training and doing those things is not as hard of a sell for them usually. Their bodies sort of naturally lean into that. But again, relating to house and home, connection, community, all those things would be themes that I would be talking to him about. And the thing to remember is that all human beings need community. All of us need family. Some people need more than others, though. So what I can say about these two features together, though, when they're synergized, dominant cheekbones and a dominant mouth, he'd be a great boss. These are features together that I would say really paint the picture for someone who would be a great boss likely to work for, in the sense that they've got those big, dominant, authoritative cheekbones, but they've also got that refined mouth, which is about the senses and feeling. And so you don't want a hard-edged boss that has no heart, no empathy or compassion. And at least by face reading standards, I would say he's got a good mixture of both, and that would be someone I would want to work for. So only time would tell, and if I was working with him privately, I'd know more about him. These things can express differently, and if he was saying, no, that's not my bent at all, we'd have to look at those features differently and kind of decode a little bit. So outside of that, he's also got the death mask. The death mask is where a person's face is slightly skeletal in its presentation. Often it shows up with these big dominant cheekbones and the cheeks recess a little bit. Now, he's got a healthy expression of the death mask. He doesn't look pathologically ill or unwell. But again, this is a person who has a strong death instinct. They've got 1 foot in the material, 1 foot in the immaterial, and they dialogue pretty well between those two gears. They actually have kind of a middle eye representation that they are able to express better than most people. So I would be talking to him, though, about risky behaviors. I would talk to him about all the things that associate with the death mask. There are things you have to be careful of, and it can be a life-depleting metric if you're not careful. The thing that I would talk to him about is saying, how's your immune response? When we see those big cheeks and kind of big cheekbones and hollowed out cheeks, that's the immune territory of the face. And so when that gets hollowed out, sometimes people can have autoimmune, they can have sicknesses that crop up a little bit more than usual. Not always, but it is something to pay attention to because the energy of the face dictates that that's, to a degree, how the energy runs. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is his profile. He's got a really dominant profile, lots of mountains. So if we look at a face from profile, if you were to take his face and lay it flat, like he's laying on a bed and looking up, and imagine that the silhouette of his face from profile are the mountains. That's a way to think about it. He's got a big dominant nose. He's got a pretty dominant brow ridge. He's got the forehead that kind of slopes back. He's got sizable differences between the position of the upper lip and the lower. So the upper lip protrudes more, lower lip recesses a bit. And then he's got this big divot right here and a chin that protrudes. So when we see this, like a lot of mountains, the way you want to think about this in face reading is that the person has to traverse a lot of hills and a lot of ascending and descending. There's a lot of those metrics happening in life. So with this, there can be kind of an up and down roller coaster-like effect to the person's life terrain that you have to pay attention to. And again, that's not to say that, if I was talking to him and I said, does this hold true for you? He's like, yeah, it does. There's not much to be said for that other than lean into that. Accept it. Your face should be a roadmap so that you have less surprises. Life's going to school you, going through life is going to be full of a lot of ups and downs for most of us, but some of them are more pronounced. And with features like this, I would just be saying, if you have pretty sizable swings, more so than the average person, try to learn to be okay with it because that's what the roadmap is saying. So I would pay attention to that. Lastly, I will touch on his public persona, natural face, and inner persona. I thought this was interesting because his public persona looks more like the natural face, but the inner persona deviates some, and it is wider. So you can really see the facial structure. He's got these really big dominant cheekbones on the interpersonal side. The mouth is even wider. There's something kind of amphibian or frog-like about that face. And I would say it's different enough from the public persona that there's probably some pretty sizable shifts into how he expresses, behind closed doors and how he, presents in the public sphere. But when we see the big wide features in the inner persona, that means his interpersonal nature is going to run probably even more dominant. He might be even a bit more pushy in that sphere. And that mouth also, though, this is auspicious, the mouth is also larger on the interpersonal side. So if his mouth were smaller on the interpersonal side with those big cheekbones, I'd be saying, that's not as good, because that means that empathy and compassion and that tender, loving touch would be diminished. So it's like with that big mouth on the inner persona and the big cheekbones, again, we see this sort of balanced harmony. The public persona looks a little bit more like the movie star, the character he plays in the external world. So in any case, these are the things that I would be talking to Mads about. And that's pretty much all I've got. So if you guys have questions, please put them down below. And if there's someone else you'd like me to read, please let me know. Thanks.